As I've joked about a little bit in weeks past, I messed up my original social media graphic, so I put that big 9 right there. We're back one more time next Tuesday, June 9th, for our final webinar session. And as you'll see, we've covered a lot of ground over the past few weeks, and we appreciate all of you who have been here for one or more of the sessions. Today, again, we're going to be talking about staying connected and learning how to learn online and doing all those types of things, thinking about what it means for us to be a writer and what kind of writing we might think about doing personally and professionally here this summer. Our Summer Institute, their space is limited indeed. We actually have about 3 or 4 more seats left in our Summer Institute. We are very pleased to know that people are interested in this. Andy, Becky, a few others, we were planning earlier this afternoon. It's going to be a great 2 weeks of learning. And if you're interested, send me a private message in the chat or let me know and I can send you more information. A few other pieces of information here. As we have at the beginning of each session, I think it's worthwhile just to take a moment to look at the questions that we might be surfacing. These were from March, and yet they still resonate now. And especially as we think about the end of the school year, whatever that means for us in our context, and helping think about how we're going to help students move forward and think about our own professional learning as we're moving into the summer. Few tips about Zoom. Of course, I have just decided I'm going to leave the old graphic up. They've changed and updated. I think they forced a security update here in the last couple days. So I think hyperlinks should work for you now, and we'll drop hyperlinks into the chat room as appropriate. And later on, if you have opportunities, we'll give you a chance to jump in and unmute and join the conversation. A few other things, all the teacher consultants who have presented during this entire series have done so because they care, because they want to be part of this conversation, not for a stipend. And that is part of the writing project ethos, of course, is that people do this because they're passionate about it. And yet I also try to support these teachers in their furthering their own professional learning. So if you found the series valuable and would like to provide a contribution to the writing project so we can continue to do this work in the future, the giving.cmich.edu link would allow you to do that. And also, more importantly, if you have a curriculum director, technology director, literacy coach, principal, superintendent, somebody that I could speak with in your district that might be interested in more professional learning over the summer and into the school year, let me know. Feel free to reach out to me, troy.hicks@cmich.edu. And I think last but not least, I've already kind of hinted at it, we have just a few slots left in our Remote Literacy Learning Open Institute this summer. And again, if you have questions about that, please message me in the chat room. So with that, I think I'm going to now turn it over to Andy and to Jill and let the two of you take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Troy. And thank you so much for everyone else to come and join us. Some people I know fairly well and some people I know online, and I get to see faces for the first time. And sometimes there's some friends that I get to meet for the first time here, which is really wonderful. My name is Andy Schimborn. I'm a high school teacher. I teach English language arts, primarily 12th grade and 11th grade. I teach AP Lit at Mount Pleasant Schools in Mount Pleasant, Michigan. And with me today is friend and colleague Jill Runstrom. If you'd like to introduce yourself a bit, Jill.
Hello, my name is Jill Runstrom, and I am a high school English teacher at Skyline High School in Ann Arbor, and I teach 9th and 10th graders, and I also teach a class called Academic Literacy, where I help support students who struggle with literacy issues, language barriers, and other things that make them just kind of struggle a bit to make sense of school. And so that's been a really interesting class to teach as well. And I'm happy to be here today.
Thank you. So we're going to start in typical writing project fashion. We're going to do a read and response or do some writing into the day. So if you happen to have, it could be a Google Doc that you're working on, maybe you have a notebook that you're working through, maybe you have the notes on your phone, wherever you can just jot down a few things. We're going to take a good 5 minutes to just kind of think about this quote here from Coaching Teachers, Teacher Writers, and just write down what you're thinking and respond to this. So the idea is working as a teacher-writer can be a way to model, a way to inquire, a way to build coalitions needed to advocate for students and teachers alike. Our choices are rooted in the following 3 principles: aim to understand, write to discover, not just to demonstrate, and cultivate communities for learning. So it doesn't matter how you choose to respond to this, but let's take 5 minutes, and I'll keep track on my phone of our time, and we'll just do some writing here. So take 5 minutes to write, please. Okay, welcome back, writers. It's always nice to kind of start like that, especially in the hubbub of trying to get everything together, maybe paying attention to what's on social media, maybe just coming in from the warm air outside. It's warm here in Michigan where I'm from. I'm curious if we might have 1 or 2 people willing to share some of the thoughts that they have on this. And it's always tricky when I ask that because if I ask it to a group of students, you know, I'll hear crickets. So I'm going to ask, first of all, if someone is brave enough to share, and if I don't hear anybody here in the next 10 seconds, then I'm going to ask a friend or 2 to see if they might help me out. Is anyone willing to share what they've written?
I can share what I wrote because I focused basically on aim to understand.
Great, tell us more about that, Deb.
Well, it had to do with the Holocaust unit that I was teaching for the first time this year, and I started 2 weeks before we shut down. So it was a totally different experience than what I expected. But I did a lot more research because I had the time to do it. And so this writing kind of comes from that, the aim to understand.
Mm-hmm.
So often I write, and as I'm writing, I realize that I need to dig deeper to understand. I began teaching a Holocaust unit with the core text Night by Ellie Weissel and the website echoesandreflections.com for support. The number of survivor video testimonies, the many primary source documents, and the poignant artifacts gathered on this website brought this historical period into sharp focus for me and for my students as well. I understand much more deeply and clearly what was endured during this time of genocide.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thanks for sharing, Deb. I'm used to giving snaps in my classes, although you can do the American Sign Language kind of cheer too, for applause, I should say. So thanks so much, Deb. I appreciate that. I think I'd like to hear from more people, but I know we have an awful lot planned for you today. We have another space for us to do some writing as well near the end, and we'll be doing some collaborative writing together as well too. So I think in view of the time, we'll just kind of keep chugging along here. So we're going to start today by talking about these stories from teacher writers from personal, peer, and public perspectives. And this is where we're going to be doing a little bit of writing together. So if you were to click on that link, I think is the, you can put this link in the chat room so that way you can grab it. Let me stop my sharing here just a moment. I'll throw it down there. It's a collaborative document, so everyone has a chance to kind of work in that, and through that, you should be able to edit right on there. I'm gonna go back to sharing my screen. And if you were with us in our last session, we had something that was similar, very similar. In fact, it's the same, except the topic has changed. So find a row if you choose to do this. And in that row, add your name, or you don't have to add your name, whatever you feel comfortable with. This is just a place where you don't have to take notes, but if something kind of sticks out to you as seeming important or seeming interesting or has maybe a potential impact for you, maybe you just kind of jot it down, because when we work collaboratively like this, it's nice to be able to capture our own thoughts and curate those, but to see what other people are thinking, that can give us some positive affirmations as well. So maybe you thought of something and you see someone who thought the same type of thing, then it's probably a good idea. Or maybe you see something that somebody has written and you hadn't really thought of that before, and then that kind of helps you learn sort of from each other beyond what we're doing here, just learning maybe from Troy or myself or from, so that document is going to be running in the background while we kind of work our way through the presentation itself, and feel free to use that if you choose. We'll probably talk about it a little bit near the end. Okay, so we're going to begin by stories from teacher writers. I think stories are always a good place. So we won't take a whole lot of time, maybe just a couple of minutes, Jill. But what are some stories? What's the story maybe from you as you were learning to become a teacher writer, and how you kind of moved yourself in from where you once were perhaps into where you are right now?
So I would never consider myself someone who identifies as a writer for a long time until I joined the Chippewa River Writing Project. And it was at that point that I pushed myself to think more in more writerly ways, I guess. I always loved to read, and I love to teach writing, and I think I am a good writer, but I never thought of myself as, you know, as a writer. So I've always kept journals, but not in a traditional sense. So my journal picture that's on the slide right now is what I would call like a commonplace notes type journal. It's not, Andy and I had this conversation when we were planning. I always kind of had this standard in my mind of what a journal was supposed to be, that it was supposed to be this, you know, long-winded, you know, Dear Diary kind of format where you write lots of information down about your life. And that's not what I do. You can see, like, I have, you know, pictures and arrows, and some things are bold print and some things aren't. And so a commonplace notes journal is just kind of, it's defined as a central resource for ideas and quotes and anecdotes and observations. And that's kind of how I keep my writing. And it's not something I do every day. This particular page that I took a picture of is from a seminar that I attended last June in New York City. And so it's kind of appropriate for where we are right now, because it was all about social justice and how can we all make a contribution to that. So that's those are the kinds of things that I do. But then it progressed from there to I made myself start like actually doing all of the writing assignments that I created. I never used to do that before, which seems strange, but I do that now, and I model that for my students as we go along. And then I actually started to, I wrote a blog post and for the Chippewa River Writing Project's Teachers as Writers blog, and I did a blog for myself for a while, and it's things just build one thing on the next. And so now I'm, part of a group for the Holocaust Museum in Farmington Hills, a teacher advisory group, where I'm going to be writing for them, doing their lesson plans for teachers. And I'm also co-authoring a book right now with Troy Hicks for the National Council of Teachers of English. So, just one thing's kind of led to another, where you just kind of dip your toe in the water and take a risk, and you just keep on going. So, So here I am.
Thank you. And I know for me, I always loved writing when I was a kid, but I would do my writing through drawing an awful lot. So I would draw pictures. And it wasn't really, I wouldn't really say I fell in love with writing until I was about a senior in high school when I took a creative writing class. And in that class, we were allowed to and told to and encouraged to write whatever we wanted to write, which, kind of goes along with a creative writing kind of a class. And that changed my perspective an awful lot, because before I was always writing just only for someone else, not topics that I was choosing. And in that class, I was writing for myself, for an audience that I wanted to write to. And it helped me to kind of develop that writerly identity that I kind of had, but I didn't really know that I had too much. And then as I went through college, ended up going in, as I began my teaching, I started getting involved in Michigan Councils of Teachers of English. And I always thought it was cool to go to conferences, but I thought, how in the heck do you ever get to be so important that you get to be up there and actually present? How do you get to do that? That was interesting to me, because I thought it'd be fun. I mean, selfishly, I thought that I could learn an awful lot that way. I learn more by teaching other people, but I think a lot of us do that. And so that was a way to help me do that. And then I would think, okay, that's more of a public space. Then what about something else? And eventually, writing is scary, but it eventually led me to write in a whole lot of different ways. But we're going to try to think about what we're talking about today as far as staying connected as a teacher writer with this idea of personal, peer, and public writing. I think it's important because as English teachers, we can bring in guest speakers, and I bring in guest speakers often. But you are the resident author in the classroom. You're it. You're the person. And I've heard someone say before that you are the best writer in your class. And I don't necessarily agree with that, because I have seen some work that my students produce that just blow me away. And I think you are a better writer than me. But it's not about being best. It's not about being better. It's just about creating a community that we can work together, write together, and share together. And part of that, I firmly believe, is being able to be the one brave enough in your classroom, whether it's digital or traditional, to share some of the things that you have. So I suppose in typical Andy fashion, I'm gonna have a little poem that I'm gonna share with you. This is a poem called Exit 131, and this is me. It's a picture of me. That's my Festiva, my Ford Festiva, and I'm all dressed up because I'm going to pick up my prom date for my senior year of high school. Boy, I would be scared if that dude came to pick my daughter up, but there I am, right? So I'm trying to be open with my kids. Let me share this poem with you. It won't take too long. But I do this too because I want my students to see, just like Jill had talked about, that it's not necessarily assignments that we are doing, but we are participating in writing experiences. I think John Warner, I heard, talk about writing experiences. So this is Exit 131. 1994 was many things for me. Lollapalooza with the Beasties, who were smashing pumpkins with George Clinton and a certain tribe called Quest. 1994 was a mosh pit memory, and a black eye I wore like a badge of honor, forever on display, hanging on National Honor Society walls of Ithaca High School. 1994 brought my first real love, an auburn-haired alternatine beauty whose love for the Beatles was equal to her love of bare-naked ladies. In those days, it felt like we were born on a pirate ship as we sang along to If I Had $1 Million, where we'd be rich and still eat craft dinner. We were pushed and pulled by waves of alternative fuzz crackling through blown out speakers. We smoked cigarettes and laughed in a resale shop flannel. In 1994, we wore the tires of a broken down Festiva thin, riding the black ribbon of M57 East as though we were on a tightrope daring life to pull us down. We sought the shelter of St. Andrews, Meadowbrook, the Pine Knob, and the Palace as they pulled us through the fading moments of our adolescent lives. In a fading Detroit, the sun cast shadows of steel longer than our dreams. We always left in darkness, eyes heavy with sleep, exhausted from using up the remnants of our naive irresponsibility. In the quiet of the night, while my friends slept, I drove north on I-75, and there was one sign that comforted me as I traveled from the known world into the unknown. Hands loosely on the wheel, I waited for the melancholic face of Jesus on a billboard yellowed with age, whom eternally asked, "Are you on the right road?" Man, I don't know, Jesus, but I sure am enjoying the ride. White stripes in the highway blur on my left and disappear into the darkness. I don't look back. My vision reached only as far as the dim headlights could lift the night. In 1994, I took exit 131 in the last moments of my youth and headed west. A beat-up white Festiva cradled friends as we sped toward adulthood in the dead of night, no clear vision of the future. So it feels great to me to give some snaps, although it's weird because I'm doing that, or we can do this, right? So I share this with students, but it's not just enough to share and to honor the words that are there. I also talk about the reasons for why we have it and the revisions decisions too. I'm going to come back here though, because this is kind of where we're mostly focused on. And I think when you begin to, and maybe a lot of us do, own that identity as a writer, we begin to be more comfortable sharing these things out. I'm going to tell you, the first time I shared this poem with students, I was scared because I was afraid of what they were going to think of me. Like, you smoke cigarettes? Like, who's that bare naked lady group, right? Like, what are they going to know about these types of things? And maybe all of that stuff, man, that's 94, that's way before I was born, so maybe none of it even matters. But the thing is, and this is the reason why I shared it, is there's a common thread between 1994, Andy, and maybe 2020 student or 2021 student, or pick a year. And that is, we graduate. We have those moments where we know the life is going to send our friends in various directions, sort of like balls on a billiard table. And that's a moment that we can kind of capture and find some commonality. Even though I'm old in the eyes of my students, we do have some commonality. And Jill has a little bit of hers too. Do you want to share what you have for yours, Jill?
Yes, mine's quick, and this is a piece that is not even close to a finished product, but this is just an example of what I wrote with 7th graders before I had the current position that where I teach now. This was a piece, Memoir was something that was difficult for 7th graders to grasp because they were really pretty good at telling a story from their life. But what they couldn't get was that part at the end that made the memoir something that resonates with everybody, like that new understanding that you come to, or that thing that you hold in your heart that makes a memoir unique and cool. And so I show them this picture of me. I'm a little bit younger in this picture than when the story takes place. But I tell the kids the story of when I was in elementary school. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and then when I was in the 3rd grade, she went back to work. And back in the 70s, when I was in elementary school, kids got to go home for lunch if they lived near the school, because the lunch period was long enough that you could do that and, you know, walk home and walk back. And I used to do that. I used to go home for lunch. I'm an animal lover. I loved my dog. I still love my dog. And so that was the highlight of my lunch, is that I could go home and be with my dog. But what I came to know after my mom went back to work was that I missed that quiet time. The lunchroom was too noisy and loud. And so the memoir is the story of me deciding that I was going to go pay for my hot lunch, but then put my coat on and walk home and make lunch for myself at home alone, and sit on the floor and be with my dog. And I actually did that for a couple of weeks before anybody figured out what I was doing. And so it's a great story, but the new understanding that I came to as an adult now, retelling the story, which is what I was trying to get the kids to realize, is that that was part of my identity that I never really realized. I'm introverted. I needed that time. I needed that quiet time in the day. And so that's the piece, that missing piece of the memoir that lots of kids leave out, that I was able to help them see in this particular story about me. So,
Great.
And they think it's funny because of the homemade dress that my mom sewed for me, and my hair curled like nobody curls their hair like that anymore. But so it's fun to share that, though.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's you, right? And I think one of the things that people may be thinking to themselves right now is, okay, great. So, Jill and Andy are sharing stories about themselves, and these are a lovely poem and a nice little memoir. But what does this have to do with staying connected as a teacher writer? I think what it has to do with staying connected is, as a writer, you're connecting with yourself first. And you're willing to first connect with your teacher writer identity and knowing what that's like. Because teachers of writing sometimes feel different than teachers of writers, or teacher writers to me. And I can teach writing. I taught writing for many years without actually doing much writing on my own. And I would do that by relying on rubrics, and well, you did sort of these things, or you didn't do sort of these things. And as I began to write more, I began to find out that, a process of writing is way different. And some of those check marks that we put in a rubric are actually more damaging than they can be, because writing is a very vulnerable experience. And being able to help kids realize that it's okay to be vulnerable. And I'm not talking about confessional, because I have some kids that think that vulnerable means you spill your guts about everything. That's not what I mean. I mean, willing to go to places and tell some of the details that can be perhaps challenging to tell. it's scary enough to show a picture of ourselves when we're younger and then share our work to an audience that you don't know exactly what they're going to think about it. We also think it's important too to share our stacks. So we're not going to talk too much about this, but I just want you to see too that being a writer is more than just writing. I think it's Stephen King that said, I'm going to misquote him, that if a writer needs to read, because if a writer is not reading, then a writer is not necessarily doing their diligence, okay? So I share the writing, Jill shares the writing and the reading that we have here. So on the left, you can see Jill's and you can see mine. Mine, I took a snapshot of it from school when I was still in there. So you can see sort of where we were at. And I was just struck to see how timely some of the things are in the works that we had put on there, even though it was mine was 18 months ago. So that's interesting to me. Also, it's important, I think, to make our writing lives visible, right? So this slide is just to show that, hey, when you get accepted to certain types of things, I feel weird doing this with my kids, but these are presentations that I gave at NCTE in November last year, or I guess it's last year, yep, in Baltimore. And I showed this to my students because I wanted them to see, look, your teacher is not only writing, your teacher is not only helping you with their writing, your teacher needs your help sometimes too. So these are some of the presentations that I'm giving. I remember specifically for Creating Confident Writers, for that presentation, they were in the midst of doing presentations too. So what I had them do is I started sharing mine. Let me share my presentation with them, and they gave me feedback on what's working for them as an audience and what's not working for them as an audience. They gave me feedback on color combinations. They gave me feedback and actually some really good tips and hints about what I might do. I did not give the full presentation to them. I just kind of made it visible. We talked about it for a little bit, maybe 15 minutes, probably closer to 10. But by doing this, in my classroom, it helped students see that, hey, there's some successes that are happening. We should be celebrating theirs. There's some struggles along the way. I'm not like the presentation guru, so I need some help with that. And I can seek advice from just about anybody, but I seek advice from people that I trust. And my students, I trust them, and I tell them that so that they can kind of help me learn and grow along the way of doing it as well. When you see yourself as this resident author, what you're able to do is you're able to talk to your students, not teacher to student anymore. I don't feel that way. I feel like when I'm talking to my students, it's writer to writer. And that's a pretty big difference because I have a personal and now an incentive and investment in that person that goes beyond a grade. I'm actually interested in what they have to say and how they have to say it and offer some feedback should they choose to use it. It's always tempting, well, you better use it because the teacher tells you to use it. If you don't use it, then the grade's going to go bad. I don't really teach that way. I say, well, what's working for you? What do you want this to do? How can I help you? Show me one thing that you're doing well within your piece. And what's funny is when students show one thing they're doing well, about 98% of the time, I have already selected that as something that they have done well. So that helps them to see themselves as writers too. And I think inviting students into these kinds of conversations, encouraging them to talk writer to writer, and then being able to celebrate some of those successes that they have along the way is one way that we can help stay connected, not only to ourselves, but also to our students. And then I like to be able to have students take their work. Some students do wonderful, wonderful work and share their stuff out. So this is a high school Facebook page that we have. So I can share some wonderful work out there. I've shared some wonderful things on Twitter, and so you get good feedback from some people. I think it's important to note though, and you'll see on the slide, I use digital permission forms with students. So I know kind of who I can lean on and who I can't. I don't pick and choose just everybody. Not everybody goes on there. When I want to give genuine, organic feedback about some words that are just amazing, and I want kids to hear that. But just like, I don't know if you're familiar with the Peanuts cartoons, when the teacher talks and it's the wah, wah, wah kind of voice, that can happen. It can happen from your parents too, right? Like I can tell my daughter that I think she's beautiful. And I do think all of my daughters are beautiful. My daughters are going to reach an age where they're going to say to me, well, you have to tell me that because you're my dad, right? So to be able to hear something from somebody else who doesn't already kind of know you, that lifts you up as far as a writer and helps you to begin to see yourself as a writer. So if you'd like that digital permission form and you want to do that, I encourage you to do that because that's pretty useful. So these three different ways, I tried to categorize it because we all start in different spots. Like I was not comfortable going to public right off the bat. For me, it's a lot of the personal stuff. How can I write personally? This is a page out of my notebook. I used to be very scared to share those types of things. My handwriting is not very good. I have just recently started with sketchnoting, and that made me sort of scared and nervous. But once I get to play and I get to work within that, it helped me to be kind of connected to myself a little bit more and practice and play. And then with peers, being able to come together like we are here, like this is a great way to stay connected. Not just to sit and to listen to somebody like we're kind of doing right now, but to have these back and forth conversations and to know that your voice matters and your voice is heard is super helpful to kind of help you see yourself get invested and involved in being a teacher writer. And then eventually opportunities start to pop up or you see things that you want to do and you may want to go public. And I share this because I thought it was cool. That Heart of Our Why, that was a picture that came out of my classroom. And to know that going public in some of the things, people from Voices of the Middle had noticed that and they had contacted to get that put on there. I never see myself as anybody that important to see that, but to be able to do that, those opportunities don't happen unless you're going semi-public with the things that you're doing. And that increases your ability to not only stay connected, but also your ability to see yourself as a teacher writer. Let's see, how come that's not showing up? There we go. So personal writing, and this is the stuff that I kind of keep to myself. Because we're working together right now, I'm sharing this visibly with you, but this is the stuff that I do on my own. You've already seen a couple pages of my notebooking. I do a lot of reflecting, and in this case, I was choosing to reflect on my notebooking process. Here, I was practicing with a bullet journal, wasn't something I'd done before. I was trying with sketch notes. I was trying to see maybe what I could do to help kids feel comfortable with sketchnoting. So I reflected on my process, that particular process, which changes over time. And in doing that, it's helped me solidify how I want to go about doing something. So a notebook works really well for me to collect kind of my ideas. This is something that I haven't ever shared with anybody. So this is a personal writing. I have a Google Doc that I call Poems Worth the Time. And I'm writing poetry with my students or writing things. And every time I come across something that in my writing that I sort of like, I stick it in this document and I just kind of have it there so it can marinate and I can come back later. This helps me to stay connected with my personal writing. It's nothing fancy. It's not finished. It's a place where I can keep some things so that I can begin to consider what I really like and what maybe I want to go public with later. And this last bit, thinking about photography, I know is a little bit different because we can ask ourselves, hey, you know, we're talking about writing here and being a teacher writer. So what does that have to do with anything with photography? I think, and perhaps it's because of Ralph Fletcher and his book, I think it's called Photo Lessons. Learning that if you are purposeful and intentional about what you're doing with your photography, like these 4 pictures, this is my son, my daughter, and my daughter. When you're purposeful and intentional about that, you have a subject in frame that you're considering. You have an audience that you're considering too. Maybe it's just for yourself. And you're using something to curate these ideas so that you can create something new. Now, I do this personally. I'm not good. I mean, I might share them on Facebook or whatever, but I like to curate these types of things for pieces of photography on my walls in my home and ways that I can kind of keep my kids in my memory sort of the way that I want to do that. So I guess in the end, when it comes to personal writing, staying connected with that, there's not one right way to do that, okay? But I think being mindful about what you're writing and how you're doing things for yourself and knowing that these things you don't have to share with anybody is actually pretty powerful, because there's lots of things that I've written down before that will never see the light of day, that are just for me. And that's okay too. If I'm thinking about that writing, if I'm doing that kind of writing, it's helping me to understand all those different processes. So then we can better understand moments in which Maybe our kids have written some things. So maybe we should give them choice about what they're choosing to bring out into the light and share with us. Because sometimes writing can be very private, and that's still writing, and it's still great writing. But giving kids choice about what they want to bring out can be really helpful for students and for teachers. And to show that we do the same thing is helpful too. Peer writing and staying connected that way. One way is using social media groups. And last time we talked, I had mentioned Instagram, I had mentioned Twitter, I had mentioned Facebook. So I'm not going to go through and do that specifically like that this week. But social media groups are really good places. And I'm finding that hashtag 100 Days of Notebooking and Beyond, which is a Facebook group that Michelle Hazeltine has put together, is helping me an awful lot, because I can begin to see what other people's notebooks look like. And that is, understanding people's process is fascinating to me, because I can see what people are doing. I can begin to emulate that. And you can just see, like, the other notebook pages you've seen to this notebook pages, I'm beginning to play with my drawings and play with my notebooking, and finding that 1 month of notebooking with them, I've noticed I've become more observant. I noticed that by sharing my notebook pages that my thinking has grown in its purpose and intent. I noticed that sharing my notebook pages, even in school, students began to ask if I could teach them to write notes like this, which is interesting. How many kids are asking you to show them how to take notes? I've never had kids do that. And I'm not going to read everything on here, but social media groups are one way. When you go peer-to-peer, they're still private, right? Because you are in a group of people in a private group, but you're sharing it with people that you kind of trust. That's a way that helps you stay connected too, perhaps. Teach Write Academy is something that's helped me kind of stay connected too, because we can get together with people who become friends, even though we're from all over the United States and into Canada, and sometimes even in the UK. But to know that you have people with common thoughts and people who are all teacher writers, it changes the game, because they understand that you're busy. They understand that you want to write. They understand that you have family. They understand all of those things. And yet they're still willing to work with you and spend time with you and encourage your writing along the way. And I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the National Writing Project sites also. I happen to be a fellow of the Chippewa River Writing Project, which is why I put this here. But look around where you're at, and maybe many of you already are part of National Writing Project sites. But that's a great way, I think, to stay connected with peers, because it can be private. It doesn't have to be public. You have opportunities to learn and grow with people right nearby you instead of all over the place. And you can make some good positive change for yourself and for others as far as a teacher writer is concerned. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about public writing. And I'm going to share with you 3 different ways you can do some public writing. One are simply these writing challenges. And if you wanted to later on, you can go back and click on these and they'll take you there. But Sarah Donovan's 5-day monthly open write is fantastic. When you get in there, you can get part of an emailing list, and you learn to write with people that you don't really know with too well, but you're also commenting on things too, which is helpful as teachers, because it teaches us what kind of comments work well, what kind of comments don't work so well when it comes to commenting on our own student work and giving feedback to them. Slice of Life from 2 writing teachers is another great source. Slice of Life takes you through, connects you with a whole bunch of people, and you comment on each other's writing, but it's whatever you want to write about. It's exactly just a slice of that life. So you get to share what you're thinking about yourselves and connect with other people. If you're in younger grades, Poetry Friday works pretty good. This tends to be K through 4, but Poetry Friday is just simply that. People get on, they share little bits of poetry that they've been working on. Becoming an involved community member in each of these, though, is really where the magic lies. It's not really enough in my mind to say, okay, I've put something up publicly, that's good. I think I've learned way more by being brave enough to put something publicly, commenting on each other's works, and beginning to find these people who you have common interest with. It grows it doesn't have to be this way, but it can shape your Twitter feeds because you have people that you really actually do know and converse with. It can shape your Facebook feeds because you have people you converse with, and it can shape your Instagram feeds too, or whatever social media you may have. And that is something that has been pretty helpful in helping me become confident in what I'm doing. If you feel like getting a little braver, on guest blogging platforms are wonderful spaces to kind of work with too. Nerdy Book Club is one. I think a lot of people have heard about that. This is a space where people talk about books, and you can take a swing at kind of writing up a book and how you're using books in your class, and then sharing it out. This is something I use with my students too. Not everybody gets published, and that's okay. That's kind of part of the writing deal. But it's a great way if you feel like you want to start guest blogging. And the reason why I mentioned guest blogging versus just creating your own blog, I started my own blog, and I would say it took me the first 4 months just to figure out the template and the title, because I was so scared and nervous about what's this thing going to look like. I don't really know what I want to put in this thing. How is it going to look? What kind of way am I presenting myself to people? There were so many questions of the judge in my mind that I couldn't even create a blog, let alone write a post. But guest blogging helped me to kind of get over that hurdle. It helped me. I'm a person, I guess, is languages as part of my words are my love language. So to be able to hear some of that positive comments back encouraged me, and guest blogging really worked well here. And what's great about it too is you get to see some things other people are doing that you might want to bring into your pedagogy, and you get to test some things out and to see how other people think about what you're doing. And then maybe it goes without saying, but conference presentations are a great way too. And I know it can be nerve-wracking and it can be scary, but I really think, and if we prescribe to the idea that you learn more when you're teaching something, and some of you may even say that to your students. I know I say that to my students, like, teach me something because you're going to learn more that way. I really, truly believe that's the way that learning goes for a lot of people. In conferences, it's not about look at what I can do and how brilliant I am. It is, in my mind, this is something that I'm trying. This is something that I find to be useful in my classroom. Let me talk to you about some of the speed bumps and some of the hurdles, but I'll also share some of the celebrations and wonderful things that have come out of this. I viewed it as sharing more, and to get over my nervousness with that. And so when you see me present, maybe I can't do this anymore, but I would often shake hands with people, have quick introductions with people personally, to talk to everybody who's in the room with me. There's, maybe 30 people max, but not too many. But that always helps, because now it's not me as expert gifting people with this conference knowledge. It's me as teacher peer. It's me as teacher writer. It's me with a group of friends now, because we've met, and we can just share and do that. And that changes the game for me. And I've noticed that participants kind of like that too, which makes it hard through Zoom meetings like this, because to do some of that we can do quickly, where through a Zoom meeting like this, it takes a little bit longer to do, because if we went through and had everyone talk, a lot of time would go by, and then we wouldn't have as much time for other things. So I do feel some guilt for that, but it is what it is right now. And I'm learning still, just like we all are. So we're coming near the end, and I know I've kind of zoomed through this pretty quickly, no pun intended. But I want to make sure we have a chance to talk about some of this. And I also want to see too, some of the things that you might have written on your collaborative document. So we're going to take just 2 minutes. I'm going to read this, that place where you did some of your writing into the day. We're going to take 2 minutes to just respond to this. Troy and his colleagues in this article written for the National Writing Project called Teacher Writers Then, Now, Next, they had said, when teachers write for colleagues, like we're doing for each other, they position themselves within larger arguments they want to make about what it means to teach and teach well. The experience of a writing act is as important as, perhaps even more important than, the text produced. So just coming together, to paraphrase, is probably more important that we have written or that we write instead of that we have written. So let's take 2 minutes, just respond to that. Maybe it's just a quick little hashtag or something, but we'll take 2 minutes to write, and then I'm going to hear from maybe one person just to be cognizant of time. We'll take 2 minutes to write, please. Is there someone who might be willing to share what they've written? Maybe not Deb, but somebody else? That's always a scary thing. Is Christine still with me? I don't know if Christine's still here or not.
I'm still here.
Okay, cool. Would you mind sharing what you have, Christine?
Yeah, I like you, I only got one sentence down, but it made me think. So for me, I think about the writing process, which is something that we don't value, reward, if that's the right word, or give enough time for in the classroom. That active writing being the important part, we look to the product more than the process in a lot of cases.
Very good. Let's give her some snaps or some silent applause. Very good. Thank you so much, Christine, especially for me calling on you cold like that. I appreciate that. And, you know, I think it's important that you brought up the idea of time. We don't give our students enough time, because I don't know about any of you. It takes time for me to write. And sometimes when it looks like I'm not writing, I am writing. There'll be times where I'll sit down for an hour and my wife will go, "Hey, how much writing did you get done?" And I'll be like, "Oh, well, about a paragraph," you know? And she'll look at me and think, "But you were there for an hour." But sometimes the processing, depending on the writing that you're doing, can take an awful lot of time. Depending on how much you care about the topic, can take an awful lot of time. And that's something at least that I think all of us hope, is that what our students are writing are things that they care about. So we're going to have some final thoughts here as we wrap things up. And I think Jill did a nice job of talking about starting small. Let's just pick one thing and move forward. Some of us are more comfortable calling ourselves writers than others. I know it took me a long time to become comfortable doing that, but I know that starting small was really good. I also think it's important to own your fear. All of us become scared with our writing, okay? And writing privately, though, is useful. And I'm going to tell you, writing privately saved my life some pages that people will never, ever say. And I don't say that lightly when I say that, because I had a whole lot of feelings that I needed to get out when I was younger that helped me an awful lot. And writing is very special to me because of that. But not that you have to share that stuff, but writing is scary. So being able to share that is normal. Let your students know that too. Find a partner that you trust to share and challenge. Success builds on success. The more you write, the more doors open. Become comfortable identifying as a writer and personal peer in public spaces. Grow your writing by playing, exploring, challenging yourself. That's a great spot to do that, in those private spaces where you don't have to worry about sharing those things out. If you see something that somebody else is doing and you think it's cool, try it out, right? Sketchnoting, I think, is amazing. I can't do it nearly as well as my friend Paula Burt can, or Penny Kittle can, but I'm finding that the process of it, even though it's not beautiful, is something that's helping me. Seek more opportunities. Look for communities of writers like you have here. I think it's important to say communities of writers, because the more you get involved with those, in my experience, the more I have learned that writers understand writers. Writers understand process, not the process, but a process. And writers are some of the most empathetic and caring groups of people that you can be around, because we all know how scary it is. We all know what it's like to have fear in front of the blank page. We all know what it's like to do something that we think is really important and have a hard time to kind of get that on the page. We also know too that even though there are those struggles, that putting our butts in the seat and putting our fingers in the keyboard, or putting the pencil or the pen in our hands and writing at least a little bit every day is something that keeps you growing as a writer. And then I'm going to encourage you as best you can to start moving your writing to public spaces and to kind of build your network there too, because it's going to, I think it helps to give me confidence. I think it helps to give you confidence, and it helps to grow those other types of things that you want to work with. And just to kind of finish up here, I have some responses to this question. And the question is, how can I be the writing teacher my students need? And that's a question I'm going to ask you to think about too. So I have some thoughts about that. I think very first, we need to write. To be that writing teacher your students need, we have to be writers. It doesn't mean we have to go public with our work. It doesn't even mean we have to share with peers, but we have to be able to identify as writers. Otherwise, we just become rule followers. And so when a student says, well, why do I need to do it that way? And we say, well, that's what the rubric says. It's not a real good response, Okay. If a student says, well, why do I need to say it that way? I can say, well, being vulnerable is helpful because it helps you to be more descriptive in what you're saying. It becomes more useful in what you're saying, and your audience will key in on that and appreciate you for that. That's a whole different conversation than talking about simply, that's what the rubric says. You write for yourself, you write for others, you write to learn, you write to grow. You put it out into the world by risking, sharing, blogging perhaps, publishing. I think reading more, writing more, risking more, and sharing more are all things that we can do to be the writing teacher that our students need. And, you know, I know there's lots of voices in the world. Your voice is important too. That's what I tell my students. And the world needs your voice. Don't worry about the audience too much to begin with. You are your primary audience. Think about the writing that makes you kind of happy first. And then when you're ready to share those things out, your audience will find you. So looking at our time, pretty darn close here, maybe just a minute after. So that's kind of what I have for us today. And so thank you so much for doing some writing with us today. Sorry that it was a lot of pushing out at you. If there were things that you thought were interesting, I don't know if Troy did this or not, but we'll put the link in the chat room so you can go to the presentation itself. Each of the pictures, if you click on them, they'll take you right to those different kinds of documents. So thank you so very much for being here with us today. We have lots of other places you could be, and you chose to be here with us. So thank you very much for doing that. And if there's any questions or comments, I'm happy to talk about that right now. I don't know, Troy, if you're monitoring the chat window, but I wasn't able to do that. So.
No, we were monitoring it fairly well. Thanks, Andy, and thanks, Jill. I'll be really brief with the wrap up, and we'll hang out for the post show if anybody wants to hang on after the recording is over. As always, we do, like Andy said, appreciate your time and that you spent another Tuesday afternoon with us. For those of you who have been at multiple sessions, especially, we really appreciate that you've been learning with us this spring. And we are still open for a couple of slots in our Remote Literacy Learning Institute. So if you're interested in that, follow the link from the email that I will send to you. And we have our final session next week, and it's going to be a little bit different. Jeremy Heiler and I will be there and moderating, and hopefully some of the people who have moderated before will join too. But it really is going to be an open forum. We are not quite sure what shape it's going to take. We're going to offer a few things to get started, and we may end up just pausing the recording and moving into smaller breakout rooms. We may have a larger conversation in this main breakout room. We may try a couple other things. Who knows exactly what next week is going to look like, but it'll be a little bit different. And we will invite you to be there, and to the extent that you're willing and able, have your camera and microphone on and join us in the conversation. And again, if you're not quite comfortable in being recorded, we might move people into smaller breakout rooms where those sessions are not, but the main session is, so we have at least a little bit of a record. I think that's about it for right now. Once we pause, again, we'll hang out for a few extra minutes. Thank you again to Jill. Thank you again to Andy. Thank you again to all of you for being here this afternoon. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to our open forum for our final session next week. Thanks.